record? Okay, go right ahead, David.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Susanna, for doing the Zoom hosting. It's great not to have to. It's a little bit more complicated than walking and chewing gum, I think, emceeing and Zoom hosting. So appreciate it very much. Well, welcome everyone to Chapter and Verse. It's great to see a good crowd, a nice, solid, warm crowd here. As Susanna mentioned, my name is David Miller. You can see that on the screen too. I'm a member of the Jamaica Pond Poets. So Jamaica Pond Poets is the sponsoring group for Chapter and Verse, a reading series that is now in its 26th year. We're happy and proud to feature most months out of the year outstanding writers in both poetry and prose. Before the pandemic, so something over a year ago, Chapter and Verse readings, we held them in person at the Loring Greenough House in Jamaica Plain. That's a historic home that was built in 1760 by Commodore Joshua Loring, who wound up on the wrong side of the Revolution and eventually left the area. It was owned by the Greenough family from 1783 to the 1920s. At that point, the Jamaica Plain Tuesday Club purchased the house, saving that property from threats of development. The club has been the house's steward ever since. It's well worth considering becoming a member of the Tuesday Club. I'm a member myself. The house is really a lively center for social, cultural, historical events, educational activities. And of course, we look forward very much, pardon me, to returning to live readings. Jamaica Pond Poets, we buy a book from each reader that appears in Chapter and Verse, and we donate these to the Jamaica Plain branch of the Boston Public Library, which is 2 doors down from the Loring Greenough House. We'll resume those donations when that branch library opens. We've been saving them up in the meantime, but it's quite a fine, quite a local, regional, distinct collection of literature that is there at the Jamaica Plain branch. Sandy Story has already posted how to buy the books from the readers just now. It was in the email announcement on the Facebook page, if you happen to have any of that, and we can post it later on in the chat as well. So let's get going. Our first reader is Sally Bliumis-Dunn. She teaches modern poetry at Manhattanville College and offers manuscript conferences at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. Her poems have appeared in New Ohio Review, the Paris Review, Prairie Schooner, Plume Poetry London, the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, Upstreet, the Writer's Almanac, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, and Ted Kuzer's column, American Life in Poetry, among others. In 2002, she was a finalist for the Nimrod Hardman Pablo Neruda Prize. Her books include Talking Underwater and Second Skin from Wind Publications, Galapagos Poems from my favorite title, Cattywampus Press, Echolocation from Plume Editions, Mad Hat Press. Echolocation, the book, was long listed or was runner-up for Best Book of the Year from the Julie Suk Award, the Eric Hoffer Prize, and the Poetry by the Sea Prize in 2018. So with that, please welcome.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to your wonderful Chapter and Verse series. And I'm excited to read with Bob and Jennifer. Bob and I were in a class together about a month ago, but I haven't heard your work. And Jennifer, I look forward to yours. As things are brightening a little relative to the pandemic, thank goodness, I took what I hope was one of the last opportunities to invite geographically far-flung friends, hard to say, to gather in this Zoom room from Brooklyn to California. Thank you each for coming. And I'll just start the reading. The first poem that I'd like to read is an old poem. I wrote it after 9/11. The year after, you would hear, and every year since then, they read the names of each person who perished. And I'm reading it now to honor all those that we've lost through COVID. Their names. Like a rain I feel but cannot see, the names of the dead falling. Silences I hear between first names, middle, last, are slivers of empty air between lines of rain. I want to be in these tiny silences that cannot hold their deaths, but join them to all silence. Rests in a piece of music, the quiet beneath a rock, the feather on a crow, beak closed, wings perfectly still. A real bright point during this pandemic is my daughter Angie and husband Brett are pregnant, and Angie's due in May. So I'm going to read 3 completely new poems about that. This first one is called After Winter Solstice, and I don't know about you, but winter solstice loomed very large, sort of passing through that darkest day. Anyway, After Winter Solstice. Because you are pregnant, the days grow rounder with light. The long oaks bend toward each other as through a glass orb. Loose blouses like snowdrifts. I wish I had sung to you more when you were inside me and carried you less like the marriage I knew was failing. I wish I could have kept my mind in the same place as my body. This year, the winter will not drag on. I will measure the slowly accruing light and your changing form. Who knows what settles as I watch you slice the peaches? Maybe a future entomologist's fingers are finding their first meticulous rhythm. Maybe the delicate register of your child's voice is gathering its notes. Kitchen visit. The purple carrot's taste does not live up to its exotic appearance. Handsome is as handsome does, is what my grandmother would have said, though likely not about a carrot. Dead for 40 years, my grandmother arrives, this time in her blue print dress with the large front pockets that never served as pockets, though she always let me look inside. Frost laces our front window, and a single moth blinks like a human eye, the pane of glass between us. The purple carrot on the counter cannot account for why my grandmother appears, now as a moth on the window, and later again as knitted sweaters folded in my closet, just the way she taught me. First the arms towards the heart, and then the waist folding up to the neck of the sweater. Like the impossible pose in yoga, she is holding for me now, as only a ghost can, and inhabiting my pregnant daughter, herself a yoga teacher. I can sense her there, looking out at me from the womb where her first great-grandchild grows. And this is the last of that series that I have for you. This is called Ouija, like a Ouija board, Ouija. We are guided by his movements as though they were a language. My palm beneath your palm along the arc of your pregnant belly, as though my hand were the planchette on a Ouija board. There, you say. Is that a foot shifting? An elbow? A knee? It's like noticing a flutter in a bay's glassy water and not knowing the cause. Seal, fish, school of alewives. Or like listening to the pattern of rain on a roof, unable to tell which drops are falling from the branches, which from the open sky. So, this is fun. I wanted to read you a poem from this Passover Haggadah that a friend of mine, Jess Greenbaum, edited. And what she's done is she has taken various poems and paired them up with the readings for the Seder night. It's really quite a beautiful book. I feel really lucky to be in it. So I'll read you the poem from that. It's called On a Walk. And I want to show you before I do that, the art by Toby Kahn is, whoops, well, there we go. Kind of really simple and very beautiful. It's just gorgeous colors. Anyway, so this is called On a Walk. I wonder if we've taken a wrong turn. The land's curves and shadows look so different in the snow. We look around, retrace our steps, you spot a fallen tree. It's not until we lumber over the awkward trunk and I feel the suddenly familiar stretch of calf and thigh that I am sure I always knew we carried these woods in our bodies. Which way is home? So I think during the pandemic, I'm not a religious person, but I've always felt sort of most spiritually alive in nature, and that's only become heightened. And I think kind of watching animals and trees and kind of envying them because they didn't seem to be walking around riddled with the fear. Maybe they were, but anyway, so this is called Northern Flicker. I wish I could trade places with that bird. I'd slip into its elegant pattern of polka dots, some of them fading as into the folds of a fine silk blouse. On top of the flicker's fine-boned head, a flare of blue, like the tea hat my mother wore on Easter Sundays. I'd gladly place it on my head and trill her hallelujahs if I could trust once more what she used to tell me, that if we could all just be good, we would suffer less. In these bright lit times, I am drawn to the flicker's name, the momentary dimming that it brings to mind, as when a hand passes close to a dinner candle. Birches. I walk the rough stone driveway, and from their long white trunks, brighter than winter air, I sense their dark eyes watching, motionless, without judgment, as when taking something fully in. I know these eyes are wounds healed over or scars from branches fallen, and I know the language between us is untranslatable. But for the entire 3-mile hike, I sense their eyes behind me, holding me as I might hold an overfull glass of water, meniscus trembling in the white winter sky. As they look with great precision, measure me as I grow smaller by the mailbox, letter in my hand, and though at a great distance, I can feel them taking in the loops and dips in the black script of the address and its return, as I might observe without distinction the wreaths of moss around their trunks if I were focusing on something else or everything at once. This is a really old poem. For some reason today I was missing going to the gym, just being around other people. And when I went to the gym these many years ago, I think I was in my early 40s, I listened to a woman who was in this kind of quandary, and I didn't understand it at the time, and I kind of understand it all too well right now. Anyway, so it's called In the Woman's Locker Room. Over the tops of the lockers, I hear a woman talking, just the trail of her sentences, sentencing her listener to the silence of a tree, while she, like an animal, nose to the ground, follows the trail of her own words, her scent, tense, she is on the prowl. She is talking about her body. She can't decide if she wants to be fat with no wrinkles or skinny with wrinkles. But for now, she says, she just wants to keep her muscles in tone, her muscles in tone to her. Be somebody, be somebody. So you can see the choice I've made. Maybe the Zoom is hiding my lines, but I have plenty. Anyway, I'm going to read to you now the title poem from my last book, Echolocation. The whales can't hear each other calling in the noise-cluttered sea. They beach themselves. I saw one once heaved onto the sand with kelp stuck to its blue-gray skin. Heavy and immobile, it lay like a great sadness, and it was hard to breathe with all the stink. Its elliptical black eyes had stilled, were mostly dry, and barnacles clustered on its back like tiny brown volcanoes. Imagining the other whales, their roving weight, their blue-black webbing of the deep, I stopped knowing how to measure my own grief. And this one large and dead on the sand, with its unimaginable 500-pound heart. So I'm going to read the next two poems. One is for my mother and one is for my father, both of whom aren't living anyway. My mom had very severe dementia at the end, and I visited her often, and this is about one of those visits. Mother. Little stirrings in the dried fallen leaves along the path, as when I speak to my old mother and her eyes widen for a moment, then close. She sits in her chair, tweed jacket, well coiffed, looking as she did in her day, though now someone else must dress her, lift the blouse from the hanger, help her slip it on, the way she once did for me. Grab the cuff, she'd say. The soft tunnel of sleeve would hold me. Sometimes we sing. She only vaguely mouths the words, though occasionally she'll drift along on a note like a leaf lifted by the wind before it stills. If I sit by her on the couch, she'll put her head near mine, my hand in hers. Her body is how she remembers now, the way the growth of a tree, the twists of its branches recall the rain, the snow, the sun. And this is called gray whale. It's a type of whale, which I didn't know until I read about them one day, and not just a gray whale. And this is for my father. Gray whale. When they read the metal tag on her pectoral fin, a surprise of dark Cyrillic letters on this gray whale, who had swum some 14,000 miles interbraiding continent with continent, self with self. Strange that I think of you now, Father, though you too had lived mostly below a surface, the breadth of which we could not know. Until they read her tag, the cetologists had thought the gray whales off the coast of Baja were of a different species from the ones in Minsk. When I found your lacquer boxes, so small they fit into my hand, with their depictions of our home, the pots above the stove, their odd discolorations, the cheerful curtained window that looked out at the pines. I felt sad that I had not known your heart would swim such distance for us. You had never shown us one. And how small you had to make yourself to see each scene and paint it, like an ant stepping carefully along one of those dark passages in its hill of dirt that nobody sees inside. This poem is called Quahog, and for those of you who don't know, it's a type of clam. Quahog. Along the shore, like white eyelids, bleached dead clams. I see one that is alive. I stop and watch it open. The two locked lids of its dull shell let emerge a delicate foot, like a white peony petal, that lifts the grains of sand, burying itself until what is left is a pucker on the tidal flats pulsing. The sand is freckled with many such holes, and I feel let in on a secret, as when I caught the scraps of your voice, and I knocked, and you showed me the letter from your father who left when you were 5, and you told me that you read it, sometimes aloud. Its white rectangle, a door you keep open like a clam's thin siphon. These are the last 3. Any Farmer's Almanac people around reading? Yeah. Okay, so this was just a funny little sentence that I found. It said, watch for the shoulders of the beets to protrude above the soil. So it's called beets. Yes, to the shoulders of the beets, an upward tug on red-veined leaves, as if might follow miniature torsos, legs, and feet. Today, I rescue them as men I have loved, because for a moment, in this guise, they can all be good. This next one is called Work. I could tell they were father and son, the air between them slack, as though they hardly noticed one another. The father sanded the gunnels, the boy coiled the lines, and I admired them there, each to his task in the quiet of the long familiar. The sawdust coated the father's arms, like dusk coats grass in a field. The boy worked next on the oarlocks, polishing the brass until it gleamed as though he could harness the sun. Who cares what they were thinking? Lucky in their lives that the spin of the genetic wheel slowed twice to a stop and landed each of them here. And this last one is crossword. Susanna and Gary are here. We do the crossword, and we have during the pandemic every Monday night with Susanna and Gary, our dear friends. So I guess this is dedicated to you guys. Here we go, crossword. The white and black squares promise order in the morning mess of mulling over the latest political morass, what's on sale at Kohl's, the book review. Each letter shared, which lifts away some sheen of loneliness I can't quite explain. This week, arsenic and forsythia are joined by their eyes like long estranged cousins. And when they ask for the French equivalent of sky, I am back on a wooden chair in Madame Beaumoulin''s 8th grade class, passing a note to David, having no idea as my hand grazes his that he will drown sailing that next summer. I like doing the crossword with my husband. Source of support, 3 letters. I'm the one who guesses it. Glad he doesn't think of bra in this way. The puzzle rests on the counter all week. I like coming back, looking at the same clue I found insolvable the day before, my mind often a mystery to me, turning corners when I sleep or I'm upstairs folding clothes. They get added to pounds. Yesterday, I thought it had to do with money or meat. Now I can see the chain link fence at the local animal shelter. Of course, strays. Thanks a lot for listening, and welcome to the next reader. Looking forward. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Sally. You know, you mentioned in the course of the reading that you were feeling, as I think you said, most alive in nature. And I'd say that right from the start, in listening to you, I was really impressed by just the sort of the commitment to physicality, to nature, to the carnal, and where all that can go, including at the end the sort of conjoining of arsenic and forsythia. Right? Even that, so thank you very much. So I'll introduce Robert. Robert Carr is the editor of Amaranth, published by Indolent Books, and The Unbuttoned Eye, from 3 Étaus Press. Among other publications, his poetry appears in the American Journal of Poetry, the Massachusetts Review, On the Seawall, Rattle, Shenandoah and Tar River Poetry. Robert is a poetry editor with Indolent Books and recently retired from a career as Deputy Director for the Bureau of Infectious Disease and Laboratory Sciences at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Good heavens, one of those lightweight career choices. No, congratulations for having the career first and then retiring from it. So without any further blabbing on my part, I give you Robert Carr.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for the invitation. And I, particularly in the last 6 years that I've been writing poetry, have come to believe in magic. The career you just described was literally minutes from Jamaica Pond at the State Laboratory Institute, right down the street in Jamaica Plain. And the framework of my work really has been an initial interest in my life in poetry, which took a 34-year detour into public health. The HIV pandemic emerged as I was graduating, and I found myself compelled to be part of that response. My poetry and my first full-length collection, The Unbuttoned Eye, really unpacks the lessons of that first pandemic. And so I'm in this strange moment of experiencing my life being bracketed by 2 major pandemics. And so the poems I've chosen tonight are a part of my trying to sort out those connections, to name those parallels where they exist, to challenge them when they don't. To say to all of us, we're in this experience of pandemic, not for the first time, and that this is a human experience. A couple of poems I'm reading, I think reflect some of the helplessness that, regardless of the pandemic you're involved in, that you experience. Unanswered prayers. A deer fly whispers in my eye. Clouds have stopped speaking and move in silent folds. Grass, that beaten child, looks upward into blue. Tomorrow I will mow, raise my chin, curse the closed-mouthed sky. I have a feeling many of you will recognize this poem. Air hugs. Everyone is sending fucking air hugs. What does it mean? I imagine cold arms leaving bodies, traveling mackerel skies, knocking me over like Maine wind. I feel nothing these days. Those embraces haven't reached me. I see my mother flying. She's been dead 2 decades, sending air hugs. She holds the slender body of her long-lashed son, gray skies, but that boy isn't here. This is a new poem. I'm actually in process with this one, but it brings me back to, as I mentioned, I moved to Maine about this time last year, working remotely with the Department of Public Health and then retiring. But I'm coming back to a time when I was in Maine at Bates and experiencing those first erotic moments of my life. How to eat lobster. Softer than a college boy, my lobsterman is gentle as a callus, a desired scratch, sky-eyed with an upright I don't trust, sexy as sunlight on a harbor seal. Tight-bearded, blonde, he takes me to a pound. At our table on Cape Porpoise, steamers, bibs we don't wear, hot sea water. I confess, I've never ordered live ones. Mom bought me rolls. There's sweet meat in the legs, he says. Start there. Break them off. Bite down. Inch it in your mouth. Now snap off the tail. We peel back green tamale, dipped his bearded lip meat, chewy. He calls it eating watermelon. The sailor savors my slice of pink on beach blankets, mimics the unhinged jaws of gulls. Flying with those high gray birds, I wonder if I give him tongue, will I taste his heart? I flip it up, find slick force in the boyish body of an older lover. Bent in a shared breath, we smell the salt of crashing. Now, split the claw, use the cracker, open knuckles, shove fingers in the shell. We rinse, drop sea flesh in cloudy water. The nut pick slips and bloodies my thumb. He reaches across the table, takes my hand and drinks. Blood and butter, the taste of touch with a tongue, love, a shattered urchin smashed on stone, that pile of shell, the hammer of his hips, skinned outside a seaman's cabin, overhanging cliffs. Confessional. I want to be inside the wooden rib cage of a god. I want to fold my clothes in a small room with a red velvet curtain. I confess, once on Boston Common, I kissed a stranger in a porta potty. Would a disembodied voice ask, why? There's dark hope in the dovetailed booth. Low lit opening, Gothic frame, a sense of someone breathing, maybe sipping tea behind a wall. Ink stains on an oak bench keeping back straight. I confess. I hide tears from my Catholic husband's dead, his family's white veiled weddings, the dip of new babies in his drop of blessed. So I framed the poems I selected in terms of sort of the understanding of pandemics. And I think that one of those fundamental lessons for me was how through a pandemic, whether it's airborne or bloodborne, do you remain human? And one of the most essential frameworks for me is how do you sustain the erotic? How do you keep that part of yourself alive? Radical domesticity. You don't see clearly through the kaleidoscopic lens of your misspent diamond ring. You, who won't consider a braided flogger beside the slotted kitchen spoon and fear the weightlessness of swinging husbands. This is the smell. Blue fringed leather hanging from a ceiling of lasting marriage. This is the sex, curl of a whippet dreaming under a rocking bed. The apple pie is not served without a knife. A bulb replaced with red, shadows of men no longer pale. Step into radical domesticity. There's a bonded hush in sighing, strength in screws penetrating rafters. I'll hold you up, keep you safe this side of edge, swab beating sweat from your ecstatic breast, clean a cement floor beneath your quivering frame. So beyond all the sex and all the drama, if you're very, very lucky, you find love and you find the realities of marriage, however you define that. This is from my husband, who Stephen, who I've been with for 32 years. I'm reminded of what I've forgotten. Squirrels scatter nut chunks from the giant hickory tree above the drive. Walking the dog, you remind me of little things I've failed to do. I hold a braided lead. You slip on bitter shell. Could you sweep this up? You ask. Have asked for several decades. It takes bristle to care for other than yourself. The oven, heated to 350 after dinner's done. You want this on? Bedroom windows as we leave the house. You want these open? Back door unlocked the morning after I'm home late. Could you do something about that? I answer, apparently not. I've learned a few things over years. The toilet seat is always down. The 3-pie paper over, not under. Lies have consequences, and more than one chest beats with a pulse. On our walk, you stoop to pick up shit. Fresh shaved head, spots of red on a fair scalp. I'll miss the reminders. So please don't die. I have never brushed a bath. Nothing will be swept. Meals will burn. Wind and rain will pour through every opening in the house. Glass picture frames exploding in the hall. My bleeding fist. The sink filled with coffee mugs. Rot in the fridge. Even my body will smell different if you go. Every pandemic and every life has a historical context, and I'm thinking so much right now about the unspoken consequences of COVID, the dramatic escalation of domestic violence, the disproportionate impacts on people of color, and the historical context of HIV included violence against gay men. And this poem, Fence, is a tribute to Matthew Shepard, who was murdered in Laramie, Wyoming in 1998. Fence. On my May walk, I pass Frost Farm. Maine sassafras leaves, fairer than summer, tender, pulled and chewed. The abandoned homestead, empty can, serrated edge pondered against a wrist. My teeth are green with walking. I pass wild asparagus, smear mud bear prints into shoe. I stop beside a wispy hunk of skin caught on barbed wire fence. Young men hooked on fences, my breath in gaps between bone. In my life, I've seen queer things moving, shadows of outstretched ribs. Sons, old friends, the cattle scraped from muscle. I push a gate, swinging, take the light-haired patch from wire, let animals pass through as if they are alive. The skin is not a cow. I name it Matthew. The white-tailed deer jumps and misses the mark. The dead dog hunts for what yanked loose from skin. Burned closet full of clothes. I wear a spotted wrinkle on dying hand. A quiet breath blows beyond the fence as fiddle heads unwind to fern. I kiss the hide. Listen. High-pitched calls. Boys that left the farm. The last few poems I'll share, I'm spending a lot of time, part of my transition to Maine was also to bring my dad, who is 93 years old, up to assisted living 20 minutes from me. And so I'm really welcoming that chapter. My mother died about 18 years ago, and as an extraordinary woman she was, she set her best friend up with my father before she died. She sat them down and said, when I'm gone, you two will be together. Her name was Rosemary. She just died in January. And in the last few years, she struggled with dementia. After mother dies, most men need a lover. Father's lover sits on the Paisley sofa where my mother rested before she went to bed and died. It's been 14 years since the water ran, since my mother refused to get out of the shower because hot water felt so good. In the intervening years, my father's lover has lost her mind. She says the most beautiful things. Today, she said, I know I love you, but I've forgotten your name. Men's clothes. The year I retire, my father stops wearing men's clothes. A tight tucked robe, mom's open heeled slippers, genderless diapers, padded. In the cellar, selves of father hang on extended poles. His shirts, vintage, mod, paisley, plaid, unironed since Lou died 2 decades ago. Short sleeves to nose, I smell something growing. A need for lost manhood, nutty taste of skin, untouchable, a bottle of Tide, a madras that walked me to school. I decide to start wearing my father, extra large, but standing like myself. I force rounding shoulders back, fill my arms with pattern. Visiting. Today he has one sea green eye, the other gone blue. This green eye plants succulents in a garden, his worn boot. Left eye, he fishes off a lake in Maine, sky through haze. Sitting at his desk, he's a mountain in a swivel chair. I've always thought his eyes are hazel, thought hazel-eyed.
Oh no.
Black and white snapshot, mother sits in a jet glory on his lap. I recite his stories, a duck hunting view through the sights of a rifle. Before I was born, I tried to give him a bouquet of flowers from a field. Age has given him 2 faces. If I split his 90-year-old face in half, I'll find a portrait of 2 men, one who can smile, one won't, one who holds me newborn draped across his belly, another I bury in just a couple months. And my final two short poems really do echo for me across both the pandemic of HIV and the pandemic of COVID. And that's in the sense that there were so many people in the HIV pandemic who died without their loved ones in the hospital because partners and husbands and were not considered family, and they were not allowed into the hospital. And I see these images in the COVID pandemic of people who are, because it's an airborne pathogen, separated from their loved ones, and I'm reminded of those moments. This was actually a poem from my book, The Unbuttoned Eye, imagining being separated from the one you love. Cage. Did your green eye look for my brown eye as your life, your unchecked watery shit ran out? Did you wonder where I was? Did your thumb slide the mortared groove of a cinder block wall, remembering through thick paint the living line of my jaw? Did your breath break as mine does now, knowing you were wet, alone, caged, not in my arms, not under my whispering hand, counting your ribs, slowing your heart? And the final poem tonight is in part I've had to really imagine what possibly could be the next step for my dad, who is 93, and that would be the VA hospital here in Augusta. From the VA, the woman has stopped screaming, "Ma, ma, ma," across the hall. He can't get a break from the sack of gas that snores behind a shared screen. The mounted TV just declared the country's dead. He's sick, throws up warm water, presses nurse's buttons, gets ignored. He flips a tray to the floor, makes noise someone might notice. He uses bed controls to sit up straight. Outside, red and white stripes twist and waver, a tattered fly end of the flag. Through caulk-cracked windows, he listens to snap hooks clanging on the halyard against the VA flagpole. High wind, a dust cloud, the Commonwealth blue shield, white field, whips beside Old Glory. Who hasn't he told to drop dead? From the metal of his bed, the flags are all half-mast. He hasn't seen his children since the snow. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Bob. As always, you know, I've had the good fortune of hearing you read quite a number of times by now, and what I'm realizing is the feeling of grain. Okay, grain. That is, the grain of your voice as you read directly connects me through the writing to the grain of lived experience. It's like there's a direct connection between those otherwise differently abstract concepts, but I hear it every time. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And our third reader, I'm very happy to introduce Jennifer De Leon. She is the author of Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, Athenean, Simon & Schuster, and she is the editor of Wise Latinas from the University of Nebraska Press. An assistant professor of creative writing at Framingham State University and a faculty member in the MFA in Creative Nonfiction program at Bay Path University. She has published prose in over a dozen literary journals and is a Grub Street instructor and board member. Her essay collection, White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing, is the recipient of the Juniper Prize and will be published by the University of Massachusetts Press in spring 2021, coming right up. Let's welcome Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just still like buzzing from the incredible poems read tonight. Sally and Bob, thank you so much. So many images swimming around in my mind, but yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. I was born in Jamaica Plain, and it's where my parents emigrated to from Guatemala. And it's funny you have the picture of the pond behind you, David, because basically my mother, she moved from Guatemala to Los Angeles and then joined my father, who was living in Boston. And she said she took the red eye one night and landed at Logan early enough in the morning that when he picked her up, they couldn't go back to his apartment with his roommates because it was too early. So they walked around the Jamaica Pond, and she said that that's just sealed in her memory, that pond. Yeah. Little did she know there'd be such a thing as a heart emoji all those years later, right? But they're still here, and they're in my life a lot. I write about both my parents a lot. My debut novel came out this summer called Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. And this is a YA novel, a young adult novel that tells the story of a 15-year-old girl in the METCO program, which, if you're not familiar with, is the oldest desegregation program in the United States. And so she takes the bus from Jamaica Plain to a fictional town called Westburg every day. And she's trying to fit in. Meanwhile, her father has recently been deported. And she didn't know up until that moment that her parents were undocumented. So she's dealing with a lot. And she's confronting whiteness in a way that she really hadn't up until this moment. Whiteness is something that I write a lot about through essays and short fiction and books now. White Space is the name of the essay collection that I have coming out next Friday, hard to believe, or Friday the 26th. Thank you. I've been working on this book for about 10 years, and it's the kind of project that formed slowly. I wrote one essay at a time and realized, I might have a collection here. And so White Space deals with the white spaces that I've been a part of my entire life, but it also deals with the white space of the page and how I have come to fill that white space and claim that white space. And I've been thinking a lot recently about how what we write and what we choose to include on a page is really only part of the story. How so much of ourselves exists beyond the page, beyond the margins. And so I wrote an essay called The White Space about my father. And I'll read a portion of that essay now. And just to give you some context, years ago, my father asked me to help him write his first resume. And he was 56, 57 years old. He had never had a resume before then. There was no need to. And so he asked me for his help. And I got to thinking about the white space of his life on the page of his resume. So I will read that, and then I'll skip a lot of the middle and then read the end. So thank you for listening. The white space. It is 10 o'clock at night on Thanksgiving at my parents' house, and I'm ready to go home. As I hold leftovers in my hands and wear my black winter coat like a cape over my shoulders, my father asks if I can help him write a resume, the first in all of his 56 years. I squint at him. A fold crackles in the warm tinfoil mass wrapped in a Shaw's plastic bag. What? I say without taking off my coat. Besides, I've been here 7 hours, no 8. And he asks me to help him as I am just steps from the door that leads to my car, that leads to my apartment in the city, and my life muted from the sounds of his disapproval. I need to make a resume, he says. He is slouched in his recliner in the living room. I step back into the heart of the house, the kitchen, and place the leftovers on the oval wooden table next to forgotten folded napkins with images of smiling turkeys and foliage. Smudges of cranberry sauce stain them. What do you need a resume for? I ask, slipping my arms inside my coat sleeves, threatening to leave. It has been 3 years since he worked, since the cancer, since his emergency splenectomy, when the surgeon told us the lymphoma had consumed his entire spleen, and thankfully, it is not an organ we need. Then the doctor told us the cancer had spread to his stomach, and they had to clean that up and staple the rest. My mother joked that Dad had scored a free stomach stapling, and look how lucky he was. I suppose that was one way to look at the situation, even though his extra 20 pounds would never warrant such an operation. I need a resume for this company that helps people get jobs, my father explains, facing the television. Oh, a temp agency? He turns his neck, gives me a dirty look, and I wonder if he knows what a temp agency does. I immediately feel bad for throwing in a term he might not know. Can I do it tomorrow? I'm good at this game. I make promises to my parents I never intend to keep. Oh, I'll write Mrs. Kreiner a thank you note for you this weekend, or I'll help you get that notarized next week. Sometimes I do write the notes. Other times my procrastination pays off and they forget to follow up with me. My parents can speak English. They can write in English too. Fluency in a second language, however, is about more than the ability to translate one word to another. It is an invisible yet potent comfort in the culture of that language. It is why my father is asking me for help tonight. I promise, I'll write it for you tomorrow. No, he says softly and stands up. I spot my silhouette in the bay windows in the living room. My parents' house mirrors the other ranch-style homes along their suburban street, where homeowners take good care of their lawns, even if they can't afford landscaping services. Holiday lights and wreaths decorate doorways and one-car garages. The mailman always delivers an extra value pack coupon book per my mother's request. Neighbors pronounce my father's name as Louis instead of Luis. I call it our house even though I've never lived here. My parents downgraded homes after my sisters and I moved away to Dallas, New York, San Francisco, and Boston, after a lifetime of the two of them working hard to upgrade incomes, education, health, and of course, countries. Fine, I mumble, like a 12-year-old girl and not like a 28-year-old woman. I hang my coat over a kitchen chair. My father rushes into the bedroom and returns holding a blue post-it pad, the kind with lines. The sight of his careful cursive writing and black pen is like a stab in the heart. It pulls up memories of birthday cards where my mother would write several sentences and he would sign only his name. On the post-it, I see the words spray painter, computer parts, 1985, industrial machinery. I resist the urge to ask him who helped him with this. I hate that the question swells in my mind. He must know what I'm thinking because he says, I just started writing some things down. I nod, avoiding eye contact. He has time for list making nowadays. My mother is the breadwinner now. I wonder what he thinks about the fact that his primary duty each day is to make a pot of rice for dinner. I brought my laptop, so I'm just going to cut and paste my resume to a new document and change it with your information, I say. I can tell he is excited because he shuts off the TV in the living room. I continue. Then I'll save it on my flash drive and put it on your computer and print it from there. His eyes widen behind his non-prescription glasses, the ones he bought at CVS on one of those plastic turning racks. I pull up the file on my laptop. 2 pages, 10-point font in Garamond, the compartmentalization of my life by internships, GPAs, university degrees. That's your resume? He points. I minimize the screen and open a new blank document. It's good, he says, with a wheezing sound in his throat. Let's start with the basics, I say to him. We are seated at the kitchen table where my laptop adds to the clutter. I puff up the margins to 1.5 inches, change the font to 13 point times New Roman after having carefully considered Courier New, and we begin. Without cell phones or fax numbers, email or website addresses, the top of the page looks lonely. Where do I write that my father grew up along the southern coast of Guatemala, where his father worked for the US-owned United Fruit Company that helped kick communism to the world curb while pretending to care about Guatemalan citizens' intake of bananas? They were interested only in profits and maintaining a capitalist economy. My father remembers the powdered milk and banana coloring books the United Fruit Company gave workers and their families. When my father was 3 years old, in 1954, the CIA organized a coup d'etat to overthrow Guatemala's democratically elected president. Apparently, Jacobo Arbenz Guzman had implemented a number of new policies too radical for the taste of the United Fruit Company, ones that required private corporations to share their unused, unfarmed land with peasants. The United Fruit Company didn't like it, ran home, told its mother, the US government, that Guatemala had used a bad word, communism. Eisenhower agreed that a Soviet-smelling downstairs neighbor probably wasn't a good thing, so began a 40-year civil war, complete with US-trained death squads, torture, disappearances, mass executions, and over 200,000 Guatemalans murdered in the process. What this meant for my grandfather: get a new job. Being linked with the United Fruit Company only made him a target for the guerrilla groups. Where do I write that in the midst of the political battles, my father's parents were engaged in their own family battle, resulting in a separation? My grandmother and her 8 children, my dad was number 3, were forced to move to the capital so the oldest ones could find work in chicken factories and sweatshops. Meanwhile, my grandfather wandered around the country like a bachelor. 20 years old, he traveled through Mexico and crossed the border in Tijuana. My father then lived in Los Angeles briefly before moving to Boston temporarily for a job he would have for the next 3 decades. Where do I put on my father's resume the address of my parents' first apartment in Jamaica Plain, or the house they bought before they turned 30? The rooms they fought to fill with objects my sisters and I desperately wanted: Cabbage Patch Kid dolls, Nintendo, a computer. Why does the term permanent address suddenly seem so sparse? So I continue helping my father write his resume and all the components and reflect on his life. And then we kind of bump into some trouble. He is wearing the navy blue Foxwoods Casino t-shirt and gray sweatpants he has worn all day, even though it is Thanksgiving. He crosses his thin, freckled arms, which now look like those of an old man. Be specific, I say. The more specific, the better. I sound like an English teacher with her student during a one-on-one conference. He scratches his upper arm and says, mostly computer parts, sometimes hospital equipment, like those x-ray machines. He looks down at his slippers. I can practically feel the cold CT scan room, chemotherapy, radiation, a port that had to be surgically installed above his heart so the veins could access the medicine while I held my father's hand for the first time since I was a child. Yes, I know. Sometimes missiles too. I'm sorry? Yeah, but when we made those, we weren't supposed to say anything because, he tilts his head in the general direction of Iraq. Right. When I'm done typing his resume, I take the flash drive and insert it into the back of my parents' desktop computer in the living room. My mom is still talking on the phone, long distance, I suspect, because the tone of her voice has a slightly higher, more polite pitch. The document will not open. What's the matter? My father asks. My parents bought their first computer just a few months ago. My mother asked repeatedly, and I didn't help. My cousin Monica went with them to Best Buy. Monica sells yard sale items on eBay, so my mom figured she knew about computadoras. The computer doesn't have Microsoft Word, so it won't open the document, I say. Why does it not have it? I ordered the package deal, my mother whispers with her hand covering the phone receiver. It's not my fault. Maybe I should have helped her order the computer. What if this doesn't work? Maybe it will work. Please work. Why do I feel guilty? The familiar emotion is stuck in my throat. I should be a better daughter. What's my problem? I'm conveniently forgetting all the times my mother has hemmed my pants and skirts, the countless trips my father has taken to the mechanic on my behalf, the dozens of times both of them have driven me to the airport, attended my readings, and fed me. All this aside from having raised me in a country that wasn't their homeland, in a language that wasn't their own, and even if they didn't understand them, mostly supporting my passions for travel and writing. How am I supposed to know? I whine. My mother hangs up and calls me a malcriada. My father and I hover over the computer. Maybe you should turn it off and then on again, she says. She's still wearing her apron, having spent the better part of the day working for a wealthy family so they could enjoy their Thanksgiving dinner without being bothered to do the dishes. That's not going to help. The problem is you didn't order Microsoft Office, so it can't open the document, I say without looking at her. Well, my mother mocks, you did not help us. I see the panic in my father's eyes. He had a similar look in his eyes when he told me it was lymphoma. It is a look I'm not used to seeing from him, one that reveals his vulnerability. I remember printing out all the information I could about it that night, and the next day handing him a packet of wordy articles and black and white charts and diagrams. He glanced at them and stuffed them in the drawer of the hospital beside a table next to magazines like People in Espanol. It's almost midnight. The refrigerator hums down the hall. I feel like a failure. All right, look, why don't I connect the printer to my laptop and I can just print the resume from there? My mom claps. She says, para todo hay una solución. It's her favorite saying. For everything, there is a solution. During the next 40 seconds, I feel as if I am disconnecting a bomb. I need to install the printer software in my laptop, restart the computer, and plug the correct cables into their specific slots while my father stands so close that his wheezing is distracting me. He goes to the kitchen and returns with a damp rag and a flashlight. He wipes down the desktop monitor and printer, straightens up the surrounding nest of pens and scraps of paper. Then he turns on the flashlight and shines it over my laptop as if this will help speed up the process. My mother presses the redial button on the cordless phone and props a pillow behind her head on the black leather couch, while my father and I stare at the printer that is making sounds like it is hungry. It spits out a half-starved document. We stare at the illuminated laptop screen, the printer, and finally his resume, his life's work described on one page that until tonight, he couldn't even hold in his hands. Later, while driving back to my apartment on the flat, dark strip of road that is the Massachusetts Turnpike, I don't turn on the radio. I reflect on what is not on my father's resume, what is in the white space outside the education, professional experience, skills categories, and how it is the richness of this white space that I want to explore. Years later, after we celebrate his remission with mariachis at dinner at a Mexican restaurant, after he has been feeling better for dozens of months, filled with decent paying odd jobs, but no temp work, and after he has completed a computer course at the local vocational high school, he remains a mystery to me. I might never be done wandering the white space of his resume or stop seeking answers about his life. And this is, in part, why I seek to go to Guatemala. Maybe then I will feel closer to the little boy who, on his way home from school one afternoon, stopped to stand on his horse while reaching for the ripe mango hanging from the branches above. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Before we unmute to applaud everyone, I just want to note a little reflection. You know, it's so interesting how much is packed into such a seemingly neutral, I'm going to put that in scare quotes, right? Neutral, quote, objective, quote, thing as a resume. Everyone knows what a resume is. It's one piece of paper, but no, it's deeply fraught. So anyway, having said that, I'll stop talking. For the moment, we can all unmute, I think, and give all our readers some applause, please. Hey. We'll, the next, let me mention just to wind up, the next chapter and verse reading will be on April 9th, and the readers will be Claire Beams, Greg Lestage, and David McCann. Just a reminder that, you know, the information about reading, about the ordering the books is available in chat, and we'll leave this Zoom room open for about 10 minutes in case anyone wants to talk. Don't need to stay, but you're welcome to. We're going to hold the space for a few minutes, and thank you again to all the readers and to you for being here. So thanks. Now the space is open.
That was great. I loved all of it. Jennifer, I'm just curious, were you, 'cause you mentioned your young adult novel, and I teach 8th grade, so I'm always looking for more new novels, but I'm also curious, were you a METCO student yourself?
I was not a METCO student. We moved to Framingham when I was 2.
Got it.
And but I felt like a METCO student because I was like constantly moving between worlds. Like during the week, I was one gen in school. I really was, all of my friends were white, all of my teachers were white, and I was very comfortable. This was my world. I studied French, I was in honors classes, I played lacrosse, I worked at the Gap, you know, and then it's like on the weekends, we'd go to Boston, to Jamaica Plain. And right on Sheridan Street, my grandmother had an apartment, and we'd stuff ourselves in there with tons of family, and it was loud, and there was food, and somebody was always passing a baby around. And so I always felt like too Latina in Framingham. And then when I was in Jamaica Plain, I felt too white. My cousins would call me white girl, gringa. So I felt like writing this book, and I wanted to put the character in METCO to figuratively and literally move between 2 worlds. But it's being picked up for curriculum actually in 8th grade classrooms in Framingham. So, and I do lots of school visits. So stay in touch.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Have you seen, there was a documentary that came out recently, I think it's called Code Switching. Yeah.
Yes.
About around. Yeah. Great.
Sheridan Street, that's pretty near me. I'm on Mozart.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Like 2 streets over. Yeah. What else?
And if anyone who came late needs the reader information, because I don't think you can see the chat that would have come in before you joined. So if anyone came in late and wants to see the information for buying any books, just let us know and we'll drop that in the chat again.
I still see
I'll
it.
just drop it in the chat again.
Okay, thanks, Sandy.
Yeah.
I'll stop recording too.